I trusted my son so much that I gave him the power to control my entire life. And that trust, it almost destroyed me. After I retired, I handed everything over to my son James. Power of attorney, full control. I believed he would protect me, stand by me, be the support I needed in my old age. I never imagined he would look at my home, my beautiful, historic house in the heart of New Orleans, and see nothing more to money. That house wasn't just bricks and walls. In a city known for its rich culture and timeless architecture, it was something special. It was my life's work. Every corner held memories. Every room had a story. Then one day, I came back from a short trip, and everything changed. I placed complete trust in my son James. Not the kind of trust people speak about casually, but the kind that comes from years of love, sacrifice, and belief that your own child would never let you fall. After retiring, when my strength wasn't what it used to be, and the world felt just a little harder to manage alone, I made a decision that I thought would bring me peace. I handed him power of attorney, giving him full control over my finances, my property, and the decisions that shaped my life. To me, it wasn't about paperwork or authority. It was about faith. Faith that my son would stand where I could no longer stand as firmly, and protect what I had spent my entire life building. I still remember the day I signed those documents. James sat across from me, calm and confident, reassuring me that everything would be handled with care. He spoke like a responsible man, like someone who understood the weight of what I was giving him. I looked into his eyes and saw the little boy I had raised, the one I had taught right from wrong, the one I had carried on my shoulders and guided through life's toughest moments. In that moment, there was no doubt in my heart. I believed I was doing the right thing. Retirement had changed my routine. The busy days were gone, replaced by slower mornings and quiet evenings. I told myself this was the reward for a lifetime of hard work, and knowing that James was handling everything gave me a sense of relief. I didn't have to worry about bills, paperwork, or complicated legal matters anymore. I trusted that he would take care of it all, just as I had once taken care of him. There were small signs, though, little things that didn't sit right with me. Sometimes he avoided certain conversations or brushed off my questions with vague answers. Other times, he seemed too busy to explain details I thought I deserved to know. But I pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself I was overthinking, that I needed to let go and trust him fully. After all, this was my son. Questioning him felt almost like questioning my own upbringing, my own values. I convinced myself that trust meant not interfering, not doubting, not asking too many questions. I believed that giving him control also meant giving him space, and deep down, I wanted to believe that he would honor that trust, that he would protect not just my assets, but my dignity as well. I never imagined that the very trust I gave so freely would one day become the reason my entire world would begin to slip away, quietly at first, almost unnoticed. My home in New Orleans was never just a place to live. It was a reflection of everything I had built over a lifetime. Every brick, every beam, every carefully restored detail carried a piece of my story. In a city known for its rich culture, music, and timeless architecture, that house stood as something truly special. It wasn't the biggest or the most modern, but it had character, something you can't buy or replace. I had spent years shaping that house into what it was. It didn't come perfect. When I first acquired it, it needed work. More than most people would have been willing to take on, but I saw potential where others saw problems. I invested not just money but time, patience, and heart into bringing it back to life. I restored the wooden floors one plank at a time, making sure their original charm was preserved. I paid attention to the smallest details, from the antique fixtures to the intricate designs that made the house feel alive again. Each room held memories that couldn't be measured in dollars. The living room was where laughter once filled the air, where family gatherings brought warmth, even on the hardest days. The kitchen wasn't just a place for meals, it was where conversations unfolded, where stories were shared, and where time seemed to slow down. The windows let in the golden light of the city, casting a glow that made everything feel meaningful, as if the house itself understood the life within it. Outside, the lawn and the entrance carried their own quiet pride. People passing by would often slow down, admiring the beauty of a home that felt both historic and alive. It was the kind of place that belonged to the soul of the city, blending into its rhythm while standing out in its own way. I took pride in knowing that I had preserved something valuable, not just for myself, but for the heritage of the place it stood in. To others, it might have been just another property in a desirable location. But to me, it was far more than that. It was the result of years of effort, sacrifice, and dedication. It represented stability, identity, and everything I had worked for. Selling it was never something I considered, not even for a moment. Some things in life are beyond money, and this house was one of them. Whenever I walked through its halls, I felt a sense of belonging that couldn't be replicated anywhere else. It was more than a structure. It was a part of who I was. The thought that anyone could look at it and reduce it to a simple transaction, a number on paper, was something I couldn't even begin to understand. And yet, without realizing it, that was exactly how someone close to me had started to see it. The trip had been short, nothing out of the ordinary, just a few days away to clear my mind and enjoy a change of pace. I remember feeling unusually calm on the journey back, thinking about the comfort of returning home, the familiar walls, the quiet sense of belonging that waited for me. There's something about coming back to your own space after being away that brings a kind of peace you can't find anywhere else. I held on to that feeling as I made my way back, unaware that everything I was expecting was about to be taken from me. As I turned onto my street in New Orleans, something felt off. At first, I couldn't place it. The neighborhood looked the same, the trees still lined the sidewalks, and the houses stood quietly, as they always had. But then my eyes landed on something that didn't belong, a large sign planted right in front of my home. Bright, bold letters that read, SOLD. For a moment, I just stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't register. My mind searched for a logical explanation, something that would make it all fit together, but nothing came. I slowed my steps, my heartbeat began to rise as a strange unease settled deep inside me. This had to be a mistake. It had to be. I walked closer, each step heavier than the last. The sign didn't disappear. It stood there, firm and undeniable, as if it had every right to be there. My eyes moved from the sign to the house, and that's when I noticed the next thing, the door. Something about it looked different. When I reached out to open it, The truth hit me all at once. The lock had been changed. My hand froze on the handle. For a second, I couldn't move. A wave of confusion rushed over me, followed quickly by fear. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was something real, something serious. My thoughts began racing, trying to catch up with what was happening. But everything felt out of control. I knocked on the door, at first lightly, then harder, and then with urgency. Each knock echoed louder in my ears, as if demanding answers that no one was there to give. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my chest, in my throat, in every part of my body. Time seemed to stretch, each second feeling longer than the last as I stood there waiting. Finally, I heard movement inside. Footsteps approached the door, slow and unfamiliar. When it opened, the face that looked back at me was not one I recognized. A stranger stood in my doorway, looking at me with confusion, as if I were the one who didn't belong there. In that moment, everything inside me shifted. The sense of safety I had always associated with that place vanished. The home that had once welcomed me without question now stood between me and the truth, silent and unreachable. I could feel it slipping away from me, piece by piece, as reality began to settle in, heavy and impossible to ignore. The man stood there, holding the door as if it belonged to him, his expression calm but slightly puzzled. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I was still trying to process the sight of a stranger standing inside my home, while he looked at me like I was the one out of place. The silence between us felt heavy, filled with confusion and something darker that I couldn't yet name. "I think you've made a mistake," I finally said, my voice unsteady despite my effort to stay calm. "This is my house." He frowned slightly, studying my face as if trying to understand what I meant. Then, in a tone that was polite but firm, he replied, "I'm sorry, but I bought this property 3 days ago." Those words hit me harder than I expected. But the idea felt unreal, like something out of a bad dream that hadn't fully taken shape yet. I shook my head slowly, refusing to accept what I was hearing. "That's not possible," I said. "There must be some confusion. I never sold this house." The man hesitated for a moment, then stepped slightly aside, as if to ease the tension. He didn't look like someone trying to deceive me. If anything, he seemed genuinely certain of what he was saying, which made it even more unsettling. "I purchased it from your son, James," he continued, his voice steady. "He handled everything. The paperwork was clear." The moment I heard my son's name, something inside me tightened. A cold feeling spread through my chest, one that I couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't a random mistake. This was something far worse. "What did you say?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "James," he repeated. "He told me his father had passed away, said he was the sole heir. He showed me all the documents, death certificate, ownership transfer, everything checked out." Each word felt like a blow. Passed away. Sole heir. The phrases echoed in my mind, refusing to make sense, and yet forming a reality I couldn't escape. My breath grew shallow, and for a moment, I had to steady myself just to remain standing. "You're saying he told you I'm dead?" I managed to say, the disbelief clear in my voice. The man's expression changed slightly, uncertainty creeping in as he realized the gravity of the situation. "That's what the documents stated," he said carefully. "I had no reason to doubt them. Everything looked legitimate. legitimate. That word lingered, sharp and unforgiving, because if it all looked real, then it had been planned, prepared, executed with intention. My mind began racing, piecing everything together in fragments. The trust I had placed in James, the control I had given him, the small signs I had ignored, it all came crashing back at once, forming a truth I could no longer deny. My own son hadn't just betrayed me, he had erased me. I looked past the man, into the house that once held my entire life. The familiar walls now felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Everything inside, every memory, every piece of my past, had been handed over as if I had never existed. I didn't know. The man added, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. If I had known, but his words faded into the background. Because at that moment, it wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about the realization settling deep within me, heavy and impossible to ignore, that the person I trusted most had turned my life into a lie, and the place I once called home was no longer mine to claim. I stood there in stunned silence, the stranger's words repeating in my mind like a cruel echo. My own son had declared me dead, not by accident, not through some misunderstanding, but deliberately on paper, in legal documents with signatures and seals meant to make it look real. The weight of that truth pressed down on me, so heavily that for a moment I could barely breathe. I had spent my entire life protecting James. From the day he was born, everything I did was for him. I worked long hours, sacrificed comforts, and carried burdens he never even knew existed, so that he could grow up with security and opportunity. Every decision I made had been rooted in love for him. And now, standing outside the home I had built with my own hands, I was forced to face the unthinkable reality that the child I raised had chosen greed over blood. Memories of him as a boy flashed through my mind. I could still see the little hands that once held mine, the smile that used to light up his face whenever I came home, the voice that once called out to me with innocence and trust. How had that boy become this man? At what point had love been replaced by calculation? I searched my own heart for answers, wondering if I had missed something, if I had failed to see the darkness growing inside him. The betrayal cut deeper because it was so personal. This was not a stranger taking advantage of me. This was my son, the one person I believed would stand beside me when the rest of the world moved on. He had not only stolen property, he had stolen identity, dignity, and trust. To declare your own father dead while he is still breathing is more than fraud. It is a kind of cruelty that strips away humanity itself. As I stood outside that house, a storm of emotions rose inside me. There was disbelief, anger, and beneath it all, a profound sadness that no words could fully express. The pain was not just about losing a home. It was about realizing that the bond I thought was unbreakable had been shattered in the worst possible way. I thought back to the moment I gave him power of attorney. I remembered the calm confidence in his voice, the promises that he would take care of everything. At the time, it felt like a gesture of trust and family. Now, it felt like I had handed him the very weapon he used against me. For a brief moment, I asked myself if there was some explanation, some desperate reason behind what he had done. But every possibility led back to the same truth. This was planned. He had prepared documents, lied to buyers, and used the law itself as a tool to erase me from my own life. That realization changed something inside me. The shock began to give way to clarity. The sadness remained, but beneath it, anger began to take shape, not wild anger, but the kind that sharpens the mind and strengthens the will. My son had chosen to betray me for money. He had turned a lifetime of love into a transaction. And in that moment, I knew I could no longer see him as the child I once protected, because the man he had become had chosen to destroy everything I had spent my life building. I went straight to the luxury hotel where James was celebrating, my mind burning with questions that demanded answers. The place was everything my home was not: cold, polished, filled with strangers who had no idea what had just been taken from me. Soft lights reflected off marble floors, and the quiet hum of conversation echoed through the lobby. It felt like a different world, one where nothing I had built mattered anymore. I spotted him across the room, relaxed, confident, surrounded by people who were laughing and congratulating him. He looked comfortable, like a man who had just closed the biggest deal of his life. For a moment I stood there, watching him, trying to understand how someone could celebrate after doing something so ruthless. Then he saw me. Our eyes met, and for a split second I expected shock, guilt, even fear. But none of that appeared. Instead, his expression tightened with irritation, as if my presence had interrupted something important. "Dad," he said, walking toward me, his tone more annoyed than surprised. "What are you doing here?" That question alone told me everything. I needed to know, not, "Are you okay?" Not, "How are you here?" Just irritation. I stepped closer, my voice steady but heavy with anger. "What am I doing here? Maybe you should tell me what you've done." He glanced around briefly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, then lowered his voice. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "No," I replied firmly. "This is exactly the place. You sold my house. You told people I was dead." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, instead of denying it, he exhaled as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Dad, listen," he said, his voice turning cold. "That house was old. It needed work. We needed capital for a business opportunity. This was the smartest move." The words hit me like a slap. Not because I didn't understand them, but because of how easily he said them, as if he were talking about numbers on a page instead of his own father's life. "You declared me dead," I said, my voice rising despite my effort to control it. "You erased me for money." He shrugged, a small, careless movement that carried more weight than any explanation could. "Everything was done legally. The documents are signed. There's nothing you can do about it." That was the moment something shifted inside me. Up until then, there had been a part of me that hoped, however small, that there was some misunderstanding, some hidden regret in him. But standing there, looking into his eyes, I saw none of that. There was no guilt, no hesitation. Just calculation. "You think this is legal?" I asked quietly. He met my gaze without flinching. "It's done." Around us, the noise of the hotel continued, people laughing, glasses clinking, life moving forward as if nothing had happened. But for me, time had narrowed down to this one moment, this one realization. My son didn't just betray me, he believed he had gotten away with it. And in his confidence, in that cold certainty that I was powerless, he made the biggest mistake of all, because he had forgotten exactly who I was and what I was capable of when pushed beyond my limits. The moment I walked out of that hotel, something inside me had already shifted. The shock was gone, The confusion had cleared, and in its place was a sharp, steady focus. I wasn't going to argue with James anymore. I wasn't going to beg or try to reason with someone who had already decided I didn't exist. If he wanted to play with the law, then the law would be exactly where I would meet him. I went straight to the authorities, my steps firm, my mind already organizing everything I needed to prove. This wasn't just about telling my side of the story. It was about dismantling a carefully constructed lie. I knew the system well enough to understand that evidence mattered more than emotion. So I gave them everything: my identification, my records, proof of my existence, proof that I was very much alive. At first, the officers listened carefully, their expressions neutral as they processed what I was saying. Cases like this weren't common, but they weren't impossible either. Identity theft, forged documents, fraudulent property transfers, these were serious crimes, and once the right pieces fell into place, the truth would become impossible to ignore. They began verifying everything immediately. My documents were checked, cross-referenced, confirmed. The so-called death certificate that had been used in the sale was examined, and it didn't take long for the cracks to show. What had been presented as official and legitimate quickly revealed itself as fabricated, stitched together with just enough detail to deceive, but not enough to withstand real scrutiny. As the investigation unfolded, the situation shifted rapidly. What James believed was a completed transaction started unraveling piece by piece. The sale of the house, the transfer of ownership, the legal authority he had abused, all of it was now under question. The same paperwork he had relied on to erase me was now being used to expose him. I watched as the officers connected the dots, their tone becoming more serious, more focused. This was no longer a misunderstanding between family members. It was a criminal case, clear and undeniable. The charges weren't small. They carried real consequences: identity theft, forgery, real estate fraud. Each one added weight to what he had done, turning his actions into something far beyond betrayal. Within hours, everything he had built on lies began to collapse. The illusion of control he carried so confidently started to disappear. The system he thought he had manipulated was now moving against him, methodically and without hesitation. For me, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about truth. About standing there and refusing to let a lie define my existence. He had tried to erase me from the world with a signature, to reduce my life to a piece of paper that said I was gone. But reality doesn't bend that easily. As the officers finalized their findings and prepared to take action, I felt a quiet certainty settle within me. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it does, it comes with clarity. And in that moment, it was clear that the story James had written for me, one where I no longer existed, was about to be replaced by the truth he could no longer escape. That night I returned to the hotel, but this time I wasn't alone. The same place that had echoed with laughter and celebration now felt different, as if the atmosphere itself had shifted. The bright lights, the polished floors, the quiet conversations, they all continued as before, but beneath it, something heavier was about to unfold. James stepped out of the main entrance, still carrying that same confidence, that same belief that everything was under his control. For a moment, he didn't notice what was waiting for him. Then the flashing lights caught his attention. Police cars lined the front, their presence impossible to ignore. He stopped. The arrogance on his face flickered, just for a second, replaced by confusion. Officers stepped forward with purpose, their movements calm but firm. One of them called out his name, loud enough to cut through the noise around us. "James!" He turned fully now, his eyes scanning the scene, trying to understand what was happening. The certainty he had shown earlier began to fade, replaced by something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. An officer approached him and spoke clearly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "You are under arrest for identity theft, forgery, and real estate fraud." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a brief moment, James didn't move, as if his mind refused to accept what he was hearing. Then instinct took over. "There's been a mistake," he said quickly, his voice no longer calm. "Everything was legal. I have documents. You can explain that at the station." The officer interrupted. The shift in him was immediate. The confidence, the cold control he had shown before, it began to crumble. As the officers took hold of his arms, the reality of the situation finally settled in. This wasn't something he could talk his way out of. This wasn't a deal he could negotiate. The sound of handcuffs closing around his wrists echoed louder than anything else in that moment. People nearby began to notice. Conversations quieted, curious eyes turned toward the scene, whispers started to spread. The same place where he had been celebrating, just hours earlier, was now witnessing his downfall. And then, for the first time, he looked at me. Really looked at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was fear, raw and undeniable. His eyes searched mine, not with defiance, but with something closer to desperation. As if he was hoping to find a way out, hoping I would step in, say something, do something to stop what was happening. But there was nothing left to say. I stood there, steady, watching the consequences of his actions unfold. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with a quiet understanding that this moment had been set in motion the second he chose to betray me. He tried to speak, his voice lower now, almost pleading, "Dad," but the word felt empty. I met his gaze, holding it just long enough for him to understand. Then I spoke, my voice calm, clear, and final. "I'm going back to my home, and you're going to a cell." There was no anger in my tone, no raised voice, just truth. As they led him away, the distance between us felt greater than it had ever been. Not just physical distance, but something deeper, something that could never be repaired. The bond we once shared had been broken long before this moment, but now it was undeniable. The flashing lights slowly faded into the distance as the police cars drove away, taking him with them. The noise, the tension, the chaos of that moment, all of it disappeared, leaving behind a deep, heavy silence. I stood there, watching until the last trace of those lights was gone, and in that quiet, one truth settled firmly in my heart. No matter how carefully a lie is built, no matter how convincing it may seem, it can never stand forever once the truth steps into the light. Life has a way of revealing reality, even when people try their hardest to hide it. You can manipulate documents, create false stories, and deceive others for a while, but truth doesn't disappear. It waits, and when it comes forward, it brings everything with it. What hurts the most is not the loss of things, but the loss of trust. Money can be earned again. Property can be rebuilt. But the bond between a parent and a child, once broken by greed and betrayal, leaves a scar that never fully fades. Trust is not just given, it is built over years of love, care, and sacrifice. And when someone chooses to break it for temporary gain, they lose something far greater than what they receive. This story isn't just about justice. It's about choices. Every decision we make shapes who we become. In moments of temptation, we either choose integrity or we choose shortcuts. And while shortcuts may seem rewarding at first, they always come with a cost. So value the people who trust you. Protect the relationships that truly matter, because at the end of the day, honesty builds a life that lasts. Lies only build a fall that is waiting to happen. If this story touched your heart, stayed with you even for a moment, or reminded you of something personal, take a second to support the channel. Subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new story like this. Every story I share is meant to connect, to inspire, and to remind us of the things that truly matter in life. And your support helps me keep bringing these stories to you.